talking with Steve Simpson from UGRs.net. Is that right?
That's it, Nina.
Yeah. So as in UGRs. I've known you for many years, actually. In fact, I've been very intrigued by your specific focus in, well, can I say what it is, UGRs? Are you going to tell us what
Absolutely.
UGRs are? Is that the first best question?
Yes, well, that's a good place to start, Nina, because UG, I created the concept of UGRs, which stands for Unwritten Ground Rules, um, to help people understand and improve their culture, because there's a lot written about culture and it's talked about a lot in the recent couple of decades. But I think there's a lack of clarity about what it actually means and what we can do about it. So it was partly for that reason that I created the UGRs concept. So UGRs, Unwritten Ground Rules, people's perceptions of this is the way we do things around here. And they can include things like, at our meetings, it isn't worth complaining because we know nothing will get done. The only time anyone gets spoken to by the boss is when something is wrong, and so on. So these drive people's behaviour, yet remarkably, they are seldom, if ever, talked about openly. It's the UGRs, the Unwritten Ground Rules, that constitute a team or organisation's culture. I think it's that simple to understand, Nina.
So UGR, unwritten ground rules, is really the norms, the unspoken or the invisible norms that's how we operate around here. And then if new people come in, there's no procedure manual for the UGRs, for the unwritten ground rules. It's like they make an error and they go, okay, I'll remember that for next time. So why should organisations focus on culture anyway?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. We did some research a while back, and to be honest with you, Nina, we stumbled across this question. I now ask this question whenever I get in front of a team of leaders or have a Zoom meeting with a team of leaders, and I share the research that we did. We asked this question: if the culture of your workplace was to become as good as it realistically could, how much improvement would there be on people's performance/productivity? So in our research, we gave people a sliding scale, started at 0 because 0 is a legitimate answer. You might think the culture now realistically is as good as it's going to get. And then we gave people a sliding scale, 10%, 20%, up to 100, and then 100% plus. In our research, Nina, 89% of senior leaders, that's 9 out of 10 senior leaders, said 20% or more improvement would occur. 58%, so that's 6 out of 10 middle managers, said 50% or more improvement would occur. When I do this face-to-face or via Zoom, it normally averages at around 40%. So I say to people, where else would you get performance improvement of that magnitude? So in essence, Nina, I think this is the business case for culture. And I think many leaders, while understanding that culture is important, might not have connected those dots to actually pinpoint the incredible benefits that can occur, the business case for culture, which I think is vitally important.
Well, why is it that managers and leaders seem to just accept the status quo? Why don't they do more to enhance culture if improving culture is going to have such a big result?
Yeah, and again, that's a really good question. And I haven't given you these questions, Nina, but they're impressive questions. Um, Look, I think it relates to the complexity of culture. And, I think, like as I said before, I think over the last 20 or so years, there's been an incredible exponential increase in the extent to which the word culture is used. It's so commonly used, even in sporting contexts now. It's got broader application than workplaces. But I think the paradox is that while it's used a lot, few people understand culture in simple and practical terms. What you don't understand, you don't manage. What you don't manage, you become a victim of. And I think many leaders intuitively know that their culture might not be as good as it can be, but feel a bit perplexed about what is it that I can do to make a fundamental improvement in the culture. And to be honest, I think that's where UGRs has a part to play, because it's a very simple concept. It resonates, everyone gets it. And it makes culture, I think, more tangible, because to change the culture, we've got to change the UGRs. It's as simple to understand as that.
And your book title says it all, A Culture Turned. So I guess people working with you, you go in and help them turn the ship around and improve their culture. And possibly, maybe you probably start with some process that actually identifies what's happening under the surface that people just turn a blind eye to or have a blind spot to. Would that be right?
100%. What we do, we've got a 5-step process, and we won't have time to talk through the 5 steps today, but I can talk to the first 2. The first step of our 5-step process is a step we call envision. And that says forget UGRs for the time being, because there's a vital question that we think every leadership team needs to ask, and it's this: what are the key cultural attributes we need in place for us to be truly successful while making this a great place to work? So put more simply, the question is this: what does our culture need to look and feel like for us to truly be successful while making this a great place to work? Now, it's possible that many people who are viewing this have values statements in their organisation, and if they're strong and people are fighting for those values, the values actually answer that question. So it can be treated as a separate exercise, or we might just affirm our values as being our aspirational culture that we need to have in place. But once they're agreed, and we recommend no more than 5, once they're agreed, and again, this might just be affirming the values, we can then find out what the current UGRs are in relation to those values or cultural attributes. I'll give you one example. If we have a value of teamwork, we can get people anonymously to complete the sentence, to what we call a lead-in sentence. So for teamwork, we could get people anonymously to complete this sentence: around here when you need help, or around here when it comes to dealing with people from other work areas. So that provides gobsmacking information about some of the UGRs linked to that key aspect of our culture that we're fighting for, which is teamwork. And that's what we call a UGR stock take, where we craft lead-in sentences linked to our aspirational culture, and it's a gobsmacking exercise to see the outcomes from that, Nina.
That's a very interesting process, Steve. And I'm thinking back to it was around the year 2000 where every single company had to have a vision mission statement. And I don't know what percentage of companies have not revised it since then. And that's 21 years ago. So do you think
Absolutely.
there's a bit of a mismatch between what the value statements are and what people really feel are the aspirational values, and also even what the gap is between aspiration and reality?
Well, 100%, and you're nailing it. And I mean, the first question to ask, to tap into your point, Nina, is, so what are your values? And oftentimes people have to go to the documentation. So that says something in itself. So we need to have clarity and commitment to our aspirational cultures. And if the values are talking to that, that's what we need to have clarity and commitment to. But then, you know, it is quite remarkable, the UGRs that we're able to surface. So for example, we've come across many organisations that have a value of, for example, constant improvement. So to gain access to the UGRs associated with that, we'll craft a lead-in sentence like, around here when someone comes up with a new idea. And Nina, it's not uncommon when we've done that particular lead-in sentence to get people responding with words like this: around here when someone comes up with a new idea, bosses pinch the good ones and use them as their own. Now
Oh,
that's remarkable when you think about the consequences for that UGR. Because if I'm in a meeting and that's my UGR, and the boss or somebody else says any ideas on how we can improve this, if that's my UGR and I've got an idea, I'm going to say nothing, because that UGR is driving my behaviour. So it is quite amazing to reveal these UGRs and to get people to ponder the consequences of them, because invariably the prevailing UGRs, held by often a significant proportion of people, have really damaging impact on the performance of individuals and teams collectively. It's amazing stuff.
so it seems to me that we could even call pinching ideas from people that are your individual contributors that directly report to you. That's a form of emotional abuse, wouldn't you say?
Well, it's interesting you raised that again because only a couple of weeks ago I did my first face-to-face conference in more than 12 months, and it was on wellness, health and wellness, and the whole notion of psychological safety was raised. And I'm not an expert in that arena, but I talked about the application of UGRs in that context, and I think that UGRs, I could almost reframe the whole UGRs body of knowledge to link to the health and wellness domain, because the whole issue of psychological safety, I think, is directly connected to UGRs. And for that matter, I think it's relatively unexplored in that domain. I've had a hunch, and again, I'm not claiming to be an expert in this area, I've had a hunch for a long time that a major source of workplace stress relates to a context where my personal values are different from the UGRs that I feel compelled to conform to in the workplace. And I think that's really unexplored in the whole domain.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
What I'm thinking about is that, in a sense, psychological safety, as defined by Amy Edmondson, and Amy Cuddy also furthered the definition, is that people have the ability to speak, openly, and not feel bullied, disapproved, judged, or penalised in any way. But it seems to me that another aspect, addition to that definition, is, and their ideas won't be stolen and credit denied, because people need to be acknowledged when they give a good idea and actually be celebrated and applauded. And that's what actually cultivates a better team culture. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And, when we work through this with leaders and with teams, our argument is that when people proffer an idea, most of them don't have the false or unrealistic expectation that every one of their ideas will be implemented. But people have a desire to find out how their idea has progressed, and if it's been rejected, why. And I think if that happens, the vast majority of people are very reasonable and are accepting of that, and will continue to proffer their ideas in the future. So it's not difficult. It's just too often overlooked, I think, Nina. I think that's probably the issue.
Well, Steve, there's already tools available. I'm thinking of the Kaizen board, and if it's operated properly, a Kaizen board, you've heard of it, no doubt? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is the idea that you have a small, enthusiastic Kaizen committee who monitor the board, and maybe every 2 weeks take off fresh ideas. But people can post a fresh idea, whether it be a physical board or a digital one, post a fresh idea, and they actually see it progressing. Either it's accepted and will be implemented, or it will be say, no, we're not going to do it, and given the reason, but the person offering the idea is acknowledged all the way through. And that almost gives an arm's length tool to ideas being shared, because there must be some character flaw inside leaders who feel they don't have enough creative ideas of their own, that they have to steal the ideas from the people that work with them. What do you think?
Well, there's that, and I think your idea about the Kaizen board is a really good one, and we need to have those systems and processes in place. But there's another dimension as well, and that is, what's the appetite for feedback? What's the appetite for collecting new ideas that each of the individual leaders have? And again, I don't think this starts with deliberate acts. I think it's more oversight and lack of insight that many leaders have. And once people become aware of UGRs, often it's a revelation for them, because once you tune into the UGRs, you are forced to do some self-reflection, and that really can't hurt anyone. So there's benefits in that respect, I think.
Because the trend now is definitely towards the high EQ leader, the high emotional intelligence. And this is all part of raising emotional intelligence. Do you sort of refer to EQ or emotional intelligence when you're working with leaders and their teams?
We don't, but I'm sure you're right.
Mm.
I think it really adds significantly to the EQ. Look, we've worked, for example, in the automotive industry with a couple of major brands that most of you people are viewing this would know, and I can remember very clearly presenting to a group of leaders in a region in Australia, and at the end of the session, which was, I think, from memory, a half a day session, one of the senior leaders stood up to wrap up the session. And he paused for quite some time before saying anything. He said, do you know what? In this industry, all we ever talk about is numbers, numbers, and numbers. He said, this is the first time we've ever stopped to reflect on something other than numbers. And again, I don't think that's not by design. It's just sort of happened that way. So by focusing on culture and the huge potential for performance improvement, I think that process has also elevated the EQ. So I think you're right.
Mm. In fact, an earlier episode of in this podcast is with Michael McQueen about connecting profitability with stating your purpose and making your purpose quite conscious. So it seems to me that UGRs is along the same continuum, where if you focus on culture and what is not serving, behavior that's not serving the team, that profitability is going to come. The figures will will be better as a result. Is that been your experience where you've worked with a team and then maybe observed their results later?
Oh, absolutely, Nina. And my best example of that is Kmart in Australia and New Zealand, because I worked with Kmart over an 8-year period. Many people will not be aware that Kmart had literally lost money for 10 years in a row, literally. Wesfarmers purchased it, put in place a new leader, Guy Russo, the best leader I've ever met. He loved UGRs, and Kmart at the time had a toxic culture, and I'm choosing that word deliberately. It was toxic. Stores would ring into head office, as it was then called. It's now called support office. Words matter. Stores would ring into head office, and the phones would ring out. People would walk past ringing telephones. There was internal warfare within Kmart. Now, Guy Russo and the leadership team used UGRs as the vehicle to understand and improve culture across Kmart. And we can't claim that UGRs is responsible for the massive transition of Kmart, but it was one of 4 change platforms. And many people will now know that Kmart is regarded as Australia's leading retailer. Pre-COVID, it was making $500 million in profit by Australian standards. That's massive. And its culture is magnificent, to the point where it's so good, staff are so proud to say I work for Kmart, that they protect it. They become the beacons of the culture, and want to sustain it into the future. So look, not only does it make life at work a whole lot better, you get joy out of coming into work and being part of a productive, positive, dynamic team, but there's profitable outcomes as well. It's a win-win for everyone.
Just before we go, and I'll be steering people again to your talking a little bit about your book, A Culture Turned. Can you give me what's the managers that are listening to this podcast today, or aspiring managers, what's one aspect of cultural behaviour that they could look for to see that they may not be aware of, that you find is quite common? There's a common pattern in this.
Okay, look, I'll say, I'm going to tell you a story. It literally happened to me, and I'll name the organisation because it happened a long time ago. I was working with a company called Next in the UK. Now, many people will know that Next is a massive, used to be bricks and mortar retailer, but now massive online as well. They've got 600 people in their IT division. That's how big they are. And I was working with the IT division. We were doing UGRs. At the end of our session, I had a debriefing session with the leaders. And I asked the leaders this question. I think this is such a vitally important question. I asked them this question. I said, if I was talking to the people who report to you, so you're not in the room, but I'm talking to your people, and I asked them this question, how would they answer it? What are your leaders' top 3 priorities? So just to repeat, you're not in the room, leaders, but I'm asking your people that question. There was a long pause, Nina, and the first guy to speak up, to his credit, said this. He said, Steve, we don't even know what our top 3 priorities are, so how would they? So what's my point? We need, as leaders, to make a decision. Is culture a top 3 priority or not? You don't go to jail if it's not a top 3 priority. But we need to have a serious conversation around that. Because if it is, then the next question is, so what can we do as a leadership team to demonstrate to people that culture is a top 3 priority? And in fact, with the leadership team at Next, we whiteboarded a series of questions that they could ask their people that would demonstrate that culture is a top 3 priority. Because apart from tuning into the UGRs that you might be able to tune in to now, being more aware of UGRs, I think the fundamental thing is for the leadership team to consider what are our top 3 priorities. It's vitally important to consider that question.
Now, your book is called A Culture Turned. Did you write that with your collaborative partner in South Africa, Steph Duplessis? Or is that?
Yes.
Yes, you did?
Yes, Steph's a great man based in Johannesburg. Yeah. He's based in Johannesburg, and so we work together on big projects. So, for example, at McLaren Automotive in the UK, we work together. But for smaller projects, we work independently.
And the book, it's on Amazon. What would people get by reading the book? So I like to encourage people to read after they've been listening to our episode, Steve.
Nina, it's a fictional story of culture transformation, but it's not fictional. It's actually the sum total of real experiences that we've had. So every example that we use in this fictional company transformation is real. I'll give you one example. In the book, it tells the story of a boss speaking to all of his people. This was a true story, but it's fictional in the book. Talking to all of his people, pointing to one young guy in the audience in front of everyone and saying, "Be careful, young man, be careful." Now that actually happened, but of course it's woven in to our fictional story, and we talk about, and the book considers the implications UGRs wise of that particular incident. So,
well, I'll tell you what, that's going to attract a lot of people to get the book, because books that use the fictional story, I'm thinking of Eli Goldratt's The Goal. That's a fictional story, and there's others like that. There's even Cotter's Our Iceberg is Melting about change.
Yes.
So fictional stories are great. They're easy to get the concept, and you can then, reflect upon it. Steve, it's absolutely wonderful speaking with you, and I believe you do really important work. You really do. So congratulations.
Thank you. That's kind of you. Thank you.
And they can find you at ugrs.net. The information will be in the show notes. And so you work virtually in all time zones, do you?
Well, that's the one upside to COVID, isn't it, Nina? Because geography is less relevant now. So, we're working with all time zones. Face-to-face in Australia now is an option, which is really exciting, but also via Zoom.
That's right. Well, thanks for being available today for me to have a conversation with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Nina. Been great to connect with you.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.